During this election campaign, Bill Shorten will continue to make unfunded spending promise after unfunded spending promise. He will continue to promise the world without actually being able to deliver. That is because his spending promises are meaningless unless he can properly explain how he would pay for all of them. Right now, despite having promised, despite having stated that he would increase taxes by more than $100 billion over the next decade, which would hurt jobs and growth, he still has a massive multi-billion-dollar budget black hole, and that is because he starts from behind before we even get started. In Parliament, the Labour Party has been opposing a number of our savings and revenue measures, which costs the budget about $20 billion over the current forward estimates, $70 billion over the next decade. Then there are all of the spending promises that Bill Shorten has already made. His numbers don't add up. He is trying to spend the same money several times over. It is the same old Labour. That is how Labour governments in the past, the Rudd and the Gillard Labour governments, got the Australian government's budget into trouble in the past. Happy to take questions.
Senator, what do you make of these revelations that keep coming out about Mr Feeney's property portfolio that we are now learning about?
Again, I let Mr Feeney and Mr Shorten explain his various transactions, including his apparent transaction involving Kathy Jackson. But what I would say is the broader point that I made yesterday. It really does expose Labor's hypocrisy when it comes to negative gearing. All of these Labor members of Parliament, if Labor's policy was to be implemented, will continue to be able to negatively gear their existing investment properties. That is an opportunity to get ahead that Labor is proposing to take away from mum and dad investors. We've got to remember, negative gearing enables families to leverage the value of their house and their existing income to invest in additional income producing or appreciating assets, whether that is a small business, whether that's a commercial property, whether that's shares, or indeed whether that is a residential investment property, an existing residential investment property. Now, yesterday, the Labor talking points were suggesting that I was calling for Labor to make their negative gearing, their ill-thought-out negative gearing policy retrospective. That is, of course, not true. What I was calling on Labor to do yesterday and what I'm calling on Labor to do still today is to scrap their ill-thought-out negative gearing policy, which is bad for families, bad for investment and bad for the Australian economy.
Do you think it was wrong that Mr Feeney is charging taxpayers $270 in travel allowances a night and his last property?
All members of Parliament, as part of their remuneration and work expenses arrangements, do get relevant payments for time spent in Canberra. That is not the issue. The issue is that Mr Feeney and a number of other, in fact many other Labor members of Parliament are negatively gearing their investment properties. Now, there's nothing wrong with that except that it exposes a complete hypocrisy by the Labor Party. The Labor Party wants to take the opportunity to invest in income producing or appreciating assets, whether that's a small business, whether that is a commercial property, whether that's shares or indeed an existing residential investment property. Labor wants to take that opportunity to get ahead, away from Australian families, away from mum and dad investors by using their existing home, the value of their existing home and the value of their existing income to leverage into that additional opportunity. Labor wants to take that away from everybody else, but the way they've structured their policy, all of those Labor members would be able to continue to take advantage of that negative gearing opportunity. So what I'm saying to the Labor Party, just scrap this ill-thought-out policy, recognise that the opportunity available to Labor members of Parliament should also be available to mum and dad investors across Australia.
Will you match Labor's promise to unfreeze the Medicare rebate?
All of the funding promises that we are making in health, in education, in relation to infrastructure, are all funded and guaranteed within the budget. We are making judgments on what is affordable and what is deliverable in the budget. Bill Shorten, like Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard in the past, is promising the world without being able to explain how he's going to pay for all of his unfunded spending promises. He's trying to spend the same money several times over. That is Labor budget magic pudding. It just doesn't work, and that is how the budget got into strife under Labor in the past. What the coalition, of course, has been doing is we have been investing additional funding into health. For example, $2.9 billion in additional funding for hospitals across Australia in this most recent budget. But we have paid for it by spending reductions in other parts of the budget. That is why we can guarantee the funding promises that we are making in health. We are not going to match Bill Shorten's attempts to buy votes by promising the world, by making unfunded spending promises, which he will not be able to deliver on.
So you'll stick with the rebate freeze?
A roads announcement in Western Sydney today. Are you concerned that this announcement is going to be overshadowed by the Medicare announcement by Bill Shorten, particularly since Labor's already matched the funding that Mr Turnbull is announcing?
The coalition is every single day promoting our plan for jobs and growth. And obviously, as part of our plan for jobs and growth, we are putting forward our commitments, which are guaranteed within the budget, which are fully funded within the budget in relation to infrastructure investments. We are not concerned about the fact that Bill Shorten continues to make unfunded spending promises, which will lead to higher taxes, which will hurt jobs and growth, and which will reduce the opportunity for people across Australia to get ahead. We let him do it his way, continuing to promise things that he knows he can't deliver. We will continue to do it our way by focusing on our plan for jobs and growth and by focusing on making promises that can actually be guaranteed and funded from within the budget.
Will the government stick with the rebate freeze?
The government's position in relation to funding for Medicare is very clear. Funding for Medicare has increased significantly over our period in government. And if you look at the outcomes, the bulk billing rate for services accessed through Medicare is higher than what it was under the Labor government, including for GP services. The bulk billing rate for GP services is tracking at about 85%. That is, 85% of GP services across Australia did not attract an out-of-pocket payment by the patient, a higher rate than it was under Labor. So look at the outcomes. Don't look at Labor's unfunded spending promises, which will just lead to either higher taxes or higher debt and deficits.
So you will stick with the freeze?
I've already answered that question. The budget measure, the measure that is in the budget is our policy, and we stick to the policy.
We had some extremely weak wages figures yesterday. Isn't that a worry for the budget going forward?
Well, the wage figures again show that wages are increasing above inflation. Obviously, wage inflation is lower than what it has been in the past, and that is part of the reason why we need our plan for jobs and growth. That is why we need our plan for a more competitive enterprise tax rate, because as every credible economist and economic analyst will tell you, a more competitive company tax rate, a more competitive business tax rate will not only attract additional investment, will not only boost productivity, it will also increase real wages over time. That is something that the Labor Party used to believe, but of course under Bill Shorten, Labor is now on a unity ticket with the Greens. Under Bill Shorten, Labor has significantly shifted to the left, and under Bill Shorten, Labor is now running on an anti-business, anti-investment, anti-jobs and anti-growth agenda alongside the Greens, and that should be of great concern to the Australian people. It is certainly not what Australia needs right now as we continue to deal with global economic headwinds, as we continue to deal with obviously the pressures from a global economy that is growing more slowly than before.
Senator, do you believe that the declaration that members and senators' interests are adequate? And over the past little while we've seen, in the case of Mr Robert, He's had shares which weren't immediately apparent when you were looking at his declaration of interest because they were covered through a commercial entity. We've now seen Mr. Feeney has property which you can't see because it's put through a family trust. Is there a good case to be made that we can make this and make it a little bit more apparent so that a punter looking at this can actually see what people own rather than say, oh well, that's a member of the Joe Bloggs family trust and we don't know what's actually in that?
Well, the starting position is that all members and senators should, of course, comply with the rules when it comes to the declaration of interests as they currently exist. Mr. Feeney acknowledged that he'd made a mistake in that regard. He's corrected it, and that's fine. You know, obviously, all of us who are members and senators, it is incumbent on us to comply with the rules. If a decision is made to change the rules down the track, then obviously we would have to comply with those change rules. At the moment, all we can go by is the rules the way they are, and Mr. Feeney should have complied. He didn't, and he has corrected the record, and that's really the end of it.
Government, you set the rules.
Well, actually, the Parliament sets the rules, and that is a matter. Right now, we are obviously dealing with the rules the way they are, and if there are changes down the track, that is a matter for the Parliament to consider down the track.
Immigration says that the news about Border Force staffing and investigation isn't new. When did the government know about it, and when was it reported to the media?
Well, you know, if you want me to go through the history of exactly when it was reported, I'll have to take that on notice. What I can say is, yes, I mean, there is an investigation, and it's obviously not appropriate for me to comment on the specifics of an investigation. But let me make the broader point. Our border force is doing an outstanding job in protecting our borders. Under the leadership of the coalition government, our border force has been successful in stopping the boats and in protecting our borders from the sort of incursions that we've seen under the previous Labor government and which would come back. Well, they are very serious allegations, and that is why they will be properly investigated. They are being properly investigated. That is what you would expect to. Well, you know, if you want to go through the specifics in relation, it's not appropriate for me to comment on the specifics of an investigation that is taking place in a law enforcement setting. If you want to get more detail, I would refer you to the border force, to the appropriate authorities and to border force themselves, or indeed to the responsible minister. What I would make by way of general point is that our border force does an outstanding job. Our border force does an outstanding job in protecting our borders, and under the leadership of the coalition government will continue to do an outstanding job. The last thing that Australia needs is a return to a Labor Green government of the past where our borders will weaken again. I mean, we do know that more than 30 Labor members and candidates are now in open defiance against Bill Shorten and against our strong border protection policies. So people really cannot trust that under a returned Labor Green government that our borders would remain secure. Now, in relation to the specifics you mentioned, I would refer you to the appropriate authorities.
Richard Marles has been unable to say what the difference between Labor and the coalition's asylum seeking policy is. What is the difference?
Well, the difference is that we believe in it. The difference is that we are committed to strong borders. The difference is that we have a track record of having stopped the boats when Labor, of course, egged on by the Greens, caused the boats to get here. The difference is that after the election, only a coalition government will continue to protect our borders with the sort of resolve that we've protected our borders over the last 3 years. If there was a return to the bad old days of a Labor Green government, our borders would be weaker again, the boats would be coming again, and the people smugglers would be back in business, and that is obviously not what Australia needs.
Are your policy exactly the same thing?
Look at our track record as opposed to Labor's track record. Look at the fact that more than 30 Labor members and senators are in open defiance against Bill Shorten and against our stronger border protection policies. Look at what the Greens are saying that they would expect the Labor Party to do in the case of a return Labor-Green alliance in government. So if people want to vote for strong borders and for effective border protection, they will vote for the coalition, because not only have we got a good track record, we actually strongly believe and stand behind the policies that we're putting forward. The Labour Party is just trying to talk tough before an election, and they're doing it badly. That is what Kevin Rudd did in 2007. In 2007, Kevin Rudd said he would turn back the boats. And then when he came back, he invited them all in. So that is the difference between the coalition and the Labour Party. We believe in strong border protection. We're committed to it. The Labour Party doesn't, and a Labour Green government would cause our borders to weaken again.
Does it put a bit of a dent in that argument, though, if, you know, you say you stop the boat, but some of those officials are allegedly helping start the drugs, I suppose?
Well, when anybody does anything wrong anywhere in Australia, whether that is in private or in public administrations, whether that is in border protection or whether that is in any other part of the economy or government administration, then obviously that needs to be investigated, it needs to be prosecuted, and it needs to be pursued. And if somebody has done something wrong, they've got to have the book thrown at them. But that doesn't take away the overall the importance and the importance of the overall approach. It doesn't take away the importance of the strong border protection framework that the coalition has put in place, and it does not take away from the fact that overwhelmingly our border protection force, our border force, does an outstanding job in protecting our borders, and that is what, of course, they would continue to do under a returned Turnbull government.
Unemployment figures are out today. What would you expect?
Well, let's comment on those when they actually have been released.
So you've got the policy settings in place for jobs and growth. Surely you'd be expecting it to show that.
And indeed, you know, what we can say is that employment figures in Australia are better than what they would have been if Labor had stayed in government. When we came into government, we inherited a weakening economy, rising unemployment, and a budget position that was rapidly deteriorating. When we came into government, it was anticipated that the unemployment rate today would be higher than what it is, at 5.7%, which is the most recently available data. Our unemployment rate is well below what was previously anticipated. Employment growth has been strong. More than 440,000 new jobs have been created in the economy since we came into government. And of course, our plan for jobs and growth is designed to keep that momentum going. I mean, that is why we are focused on implementing our innovation and science program to support startup businesses. That's why we're focused on our defence industry plan to support local high-end manufacturing. That is why we are rolling out these export trade deals to support exporting businesses across Australia get better access to key markets around the world. That is why we are focused on cutting taxes for small and medium-sized businesses initially, and then bringing down the corporate tax rate to 25% over the decade to help attract more investment, to boost growth and boost job creation and increase real wages over time. That is why we are implementing our plan for jobs and growth, but obviously from month to month the numbers will continue to evolve, and we'll see what the numbers are today. Thank you.